So my name is Chris Rogers. I'm a senior product marketing manager here at HYCU. I predominantly look after our hybrid cloud offerings, which is obviously here for Nutanix, but our Dell relationships, and all the other hypervisors and storage platforms we support as well. And then with me is I'll let you introduce yourself, Marko.
I was looking forward to your introduction,
I
Chris.
can do it if you want me to.
uh, Hi, everyone. So my name is Marco. I'm running our sales engineering and solutions at HYCU. Been here since the start and going through all of the things we went through in the last years. So it's really, really enthusiastic, powerful, and looking forward to the session with Chris.
Yeah, so when I said earlier, there's probably not a question that Marco doesn't know the answer to. Like, yeah, he literally
Let's
is.
see.
I changed his title because I put his official title. I did have his Haiku Guru before I edited the slides, but I better put his official title on just to make sure. So just a little bit about if you are joining us for the first time, you don't know who Haiku are or what we're about or our kind of our presence. Just a very very brief overview. So we're globally recognized and trusted. Like, all the investors at the bottom there, you can see some well-known names and faces there. Edging up towards, I think, 5,000 customers now, if not even slightly higher at the last count, across 78, probably again even higher, the amount of countries now, and 450 plus channel partners now. So I need to update the slide a little bit. But you can see we're well known, well trusted. So we're not just a startup in this industry. We've been doing it a long time. We've been doing, especially for Nutanix data protection incredibly well for a very, very long time now. And that leads us on to we are the number one data protection platform for Nutanix. And what does that kind of give us? What does the number one mean? Well, number one in terms of the amount of Nutanix we protect. So we have the deepest integration with Nutanix and multiple validated blueprints and designs. So you can actually go onto Nutanix's website and find out exactly how they've they want you to implement Haiku, exactly how it's supposed to design interlink and all those types of bits in the blueprints there. We have military grade security, so we're the only data protection vendor with a DISA-STIG. And obviously, this is a kind of a security of cyber session around our shield, which we'll get into a bit. So we will be covering a little bit more of that in a little bit more detail later on. And on the right-hand side of the slide, you can see there that all of the workloads, well, I'll say all of the workloads, some of the workloads we cover for Nutanix. We actually cover more than this, and I think I've got a slide later on all of the ones we cover. And then the middle one I've left to last, and this is our NPS score, which is something we're incredibly proud of. So if you are a Nutanix customer or you work for Nutanix or you're a partner of Nutanix, you'll know that they're very proud of their NPS score, which mirrors pretty much what we are in the 90s, pretty much all the time. And that's by design, right? We work very closely with Nutanix. We want to make sure that both sets of customers are happy. And you can see that by our NPS score at 91. And in data protection, it's incredibly hard to get a score that high because backups go wrong and people are annoyed when backups don't work and they take too long and all those types of things, right? So we're incredibly proud of our NPS score. And then just a brief history on us, and again, I won't spend too much time on this. But we kind of pioneered the Nutanix data protection industry. So everyone else was, solely focused on VMware when the virtualization came around, and we saw the Nutanix as this up and coming, and really invested all our eggs in that basket, as the British would say. So we were the first to protect AHV, remote office, branch office, rapid restores. We were then the first to protect files, VMware on top of Nutanix's systems. We were the first data protection vendor in Nutanix Mine. We're then the first to run into objects for an object lock and secure boot VMs. We're the first to do file shares, snapshot only backups. The Nutanix Kubernetes engine, or NKP, I think they call it now. They've changed the name. We're the first to do incremental Nutanix files backup with a code-developed API. And we're the first to do NDB as well. So you can see here, we've got a very, very strong relationship and roadmap with Nutanix. We've been working with them for a long time. Nutanix is actually a customer of HYCU, so they use Nutanix to back up their internal workloads as well, which is great testament to our product. That if Nutanix is using it, then they must be happy and happy with the product. And as you say, we also have then a committed joint roadmap. You can see here, moving forward, wherever they go, HYCU is going to follow. So wherever they start to develop or change or move their platform to, we're going to be the first to follow and make sure we're the first to protect that data and make sure no data goes unprotected. So as I mentioned earlier,
Chris, I guess this is the main point of this, I think, in the first place. I mean, technically, the fact that we're the first ones historically to deliver something, or first one 5 ages ago to support something, it doesn't matter at the end of the day. What matters is the future, and what we're trying to show with this really is that if you're using Nutanix in production and you're starting to use it for some other stuff and new stuff, what HYCU is really committing is to actually supporting you through this journey and supporting pretty much everything that Nutanix brings out. So this is ultimately our message.
Yeah, exactly. It's that future proofing, right? You can go confident into the next 5 years of your Nutanix journey with HYCU, knowing that we'll be supporting all of the workloads that whatever they do.
Yep.
I don't think
Yep.
anyone saw Gen AI 5 years ago being as popular as it is now, right? So who knows what it's going to be
So
in the
who
next
knows?
5 years?
Exactly.
So,
Exactly.
but we're committed with Nutanix to do that, and you know, if nothing else, they want to protect the workloads that they're building, right? So as a customer, so they want to make sure that they can protect the workloads that they're doing with us as well. And as I mentioned earlier, with the widest coverage, with the deepest integration, so we are the ultimate Nutanix data protection solution. And these are most of the workloads that we do support on here, all the way from AHV, NDB, files, volume groups, objects, NC2, Metro, Robo, you name it. Pretty much if the data lands on the Nutanix platform, we can protect it. That's essentially how we do. And how we protect that is with our platform called our cloud. And our cloud essentially gives you total visibility, total protection, total recovery, and total control across a vast range of workloads. So we're focusing obviously on Nutanix today, but it's not just Nutanix, it's across the whole hybrid cloud portfolio, including public cloud, SaaS, and then even into future workloads like AI and ML workloads as well. So it's not just about Nutanix and VMware and hypervisors where traditional data protection vendors are. We're across every single public cloud provider. We're across we have the most SaaS data protection applications protected than any other data protection vendor in the world. And we even protect things like Google BigQuery. We're the only data protection vendor to support that as well. So you can see we're not just about Nutanix, but obviously we're focusing on Nutanix today. And then we've introduced our capability called R Shield, which is on the back of our cloud, obviously. So it comes in three flavors. Well, it doesn't come in three flavors. It's kind of supported by three pillars, I suppose. So the first one is being always protected, the second one being always observing, and the third one there being always ready. So today we're going to be focusing on the always protected piece. But kind of what is our shield, I suppose? Let's just break it down really quickly. So we had our cloud before, and then essentially wrapped around the whole outside of that and woven into in between everything that we do in our cloud platform is our shield. So it's not a separate product, not a separate solution, not a bolt-on cyber package or a separate SKU you have to purchase. Everything that we do at HYCU and within our cloud has our shield embedded into it, right? So the capabilities you'll see might not make headlines on a marketing slide and might not be, the most important thing that gets made into a press release and things, but all these capabilities add up to make a solution that is ultra secure, and ready for any cyber threat, essentially, for the Nutanix workload. So let's dive into the always protected piece. So resilient backup infrastructure, reduced backup attack surface, and then complete protection of all the data inside your Nutanix environment. So unfortunately, we are in a place in a world where cyber threats are pretty much the number one reason for data loss in the world. People like me still fat finger things and delete stuff occasionally, and that happens. But when we're talking about mass data events and mass downtime, those headlines are typically hit with cyber events right now. And unfortunately, hackers are getting good at it, right? We spoke about Gen AI a second ago. I get loads and loads of phishing attacks through to my email, personal and work. And in the last year or so, it's got so much better. It's really hard to spot now. The spelling mistakes aren't there. The logos are much better. The formatting is so much better. And that's all because Gen AI makes it really easy, right? So when people are getting in now, they're actually attacking backup infrastructure and backup repositories first. So in this Backblaze State of Backup report, 93% of ransomware attacks actively targeted backup repositories, which is a huge stat. It's pretty much every single one, right? And that's because they know if they get hold of the backups, they've essentially got you, right. And there's no way out. If they get hold of the backups, there is no last resort. But unfortunately, when we start looking at legacy backups, they introduce the risk and they introduce a large attack surface. So if we look at, this is kind of a mishmash of various different products and approaches in the marketplace. But when you look at, things like agents and proxy servers, and then we've got proxies and backup repositories and gateways between all of these things, suddenly they become very chatty and they all chat between themselves, and we've got traffic flowing in each direction and the ports are open. So suddenly we can get onto the network if we manage to breach into this network, and we can figure out where things are going, what's chatting to where's the traffic flowing. Every single agent on those VMs has to report back in, so you know exactly what what version of the agent it is. Therefore, they know what OS it is. Therefore, they can probably know what patch level it is, and all of these things start unfolding. And again, like if we look at things like the CrowdStrike incident, and I'm not trying to, go, oh my God, it's going to happen, but that was because agents, right? An agent happened to be on those virtual machines, and there was an issue with that, and that caused those virtual machines to go down. And if you look at data protection vendors around the world, you'll see that they have multiple CVEs every year on their agents and their proxies, because guess what? They're running those. They have to run inside those OSs. They have to run compatibility, and they have all these problems. And the more things we have, so the more proxies, the more agents, the more servers, the more gateways, all those types of things we have, the more upkeep we have, the more maintenance we need to do, the higher chance of getting behind on your patching schedule, the higher chance of a threat coming in, right? So what we try and do at HYCU is have this zero design architecture. So the idea is that all we have is a secure virtual appliance. And we'll dive in, me and Marco will chat about this in a bit and make sure that everyone kind of understands and maybe can explain it far better than I can. But essentially, a virtual appliance that's purpose built for each platform that we support. So if it's an Nutanix environment, we purpose built that for Nutanix. If it's for a VMware environment, it's purpose built for VMware and Hyper-V, etc. And it lands in that environment as a virtual appliance, completely black box, completely locked down, pre-hardened, essentially pre-configured to a degree. All you need to do is put some basic config into it. And that means every single one of our customers gets the same level of hardening, whether you're selling tires in a tire shop or you're the military, right? Everyone gets the same level of hardening or the same level out the box, and you don't need to do anything else. So even if you're a small IT shop or you've got 500 people working for you, you can harden this and make sure it's pre-hardened to the level you need to make sure it is secure. And we don't need to design it. We don't need to figure out how many proxies and how many agents and all this and all that kind of stuff. We just deploy, and essentially the way we go. Okay, there's a little bit more involved, right? I say zero architecture, that's a bit marketing. I work in the marketing department, so I have my crayons and my my coloring in and stuff like that. So
We'll
we do
fight
need
through the marketing. All right.
yeah. So we will cut through the marketing. So obviously we do have to architect, right? We do have to understand there is going to be network ports need to be opened, right? It has to sit on a network, it has to have an IP address, and it has to talk to a few bits and pieces. The idea is it's the minimal viable, right? We try and deploy the minimal footprint into the environment to protect as much as possible. Marco, is there anything you want to kind of make clearer?
I think it's great. What I would add is complexity is dangerous. Simplicity is what is safe, right? And it's
Yeah,
hard to
nice.
make something simple. So
Yeah, agreed. Yeah, security through obscurity is no longer a good saying, a good phrase, right? People want to know how to protect things properly, that they are protected properly, and that when they've put something in, they haven't got a 15-page hardening guide, or they've got a Windows hardening guide, then an application hardening guide, and then an agent hardening guide. Right? They've just got a product that is hardened from the vendor, right?
from
That's what they
scratch.
want.
Yeah, exactly.
And then we come into backup data cloaking, another lovely marketing term. We'll explain these a little bit more. But essentially, what the idea is here, we saw that stat a minute ago around backup repositories being attacked, right? That's because they know where they are. That's because they can go onto the network and see what's talking, see that things and gateways and everything else are talking to this, and because they can get into potentially the OSs of the backup software and those types of things and get into them. What they can do is then go after the repo itself, where the data is stored, right? So if you get the data, you get everything else pretty much as well. So the idea around this is what we do is we cloak the data. I'm going to put air quotes in here, but essentially we mask it, right? We say to you, make sure that only HYCU can see the repo. No one can get into HYCU, therefore no one can see the repo, and therefore we're away. And we also isolate the network traffic away from um, management and the backup, the backup data traffic, right? So even if you are on a management port, you're not going to be able to hop across and get through into where the backups are stored. And then from that, this kind of goes into the ways observing the next week, which we'll talk about. But essentially, we also have continuous backup posture management, and kind of again another very fancy term. But essentially, we're going to tell you when something looks wrong in the environment. So we tell you if your backup, your S3 bucket has got public access, for instance, which is obviously a bad thing. If you've got your backups being stored in somewhere it's got an S3 bucket that's been made public, that's obviously a bad thing. We want to make sure. So we're going to tell you that almost in real time. And if that changes, so for instance, maybe a bad actor's got into it and then maybe they've got into your AWS account. They haven't got into a Nutanix account. Maybe they're in the AWS account and they've managed to change that bucket to public. And then they're going to attack that later on. We're going to then suddenly tell you, oh, this used to be secure, and now it's public. So maybe you want to look at this, right? So we're kind of giving those attack indicators across the board. We think we've kind of mentioned hardening already. We've kind of gone through it quite a lot. And then we've got the military grade and battle tested, right? So we've mentioned we had a DISA-STIG. So, Mark, are you able to kind of explain what a DISA-STIG is for people who aren't aware? Obviously, for me, I know what it is now that I joined HYCU, but when being from the UK, I had no idea what a DISA-STIG was until someone mentioned it to me and I looked it up. So maybe some people who are not from the US, they might not be aware of what DISA and DISA-STIG
Yep.
is.
Basically, it's a US military standard, which every computer in the US military, uh, when it's there on their network, it has to go through a number of line of steps, which are outlined in this document, which is huge document, which you actually have to explain how to further um, isolate or even secure this appliance which you're providing, so that you cover hundreds of their questions on how you do this, how do you do that, right? And it's a very, very painful process to go through all of this, and it goes through their verification from the side of military. So whatever you write in this document, they actually go in and test together with you, and then they make sure they get this STIG, which is basically a guide how to secure even further your appliance. So we are by default a black box, already pre-secured, already isolated, already stripped out of any module that we don't use. But on top of all of this, they tell you, look, disable SSH, disable this, make sure that passwords are this, and so on and so on. It's a very, very, very detailed step process, which they actually make every computer in their network go through. So it's a mandatory thing, and you can't actually go into military unless you actually have this. And it's a great tool. I mean, military drives this, but there's no reason why a commercial company wouldn't use it as well and wouldn't just go through these steps. Maybe you don't have to do everything, but you can do majority of it as well and further secure the appliance itself. What you want to make is Fort Knox of the hardcore appliance, what I usually say. So if they get to your backup, you're done. So you want to make sure that HYCU itself is highly, highly protected, right?
Yeah, amazing. And then thank you for someone's just put maybe a chat GPT or maybe they've typed out themselves, I don't know, but they've got a DISA-STIG explained in the Q and
Yep.
A's. So you may or may not be able to see it, but I can post it in the follow-up and stuff later. But you know, if you Google or chat GPT or whatever AI tool you're using, DISA-STIG, you'll find out the
Yeah, it's
information.
fine.
But yeah, it's a really important thing, and it also proves how secure we can make HYCU. That and if anyone saw Nutanix.next, that was what, maybe a month or so ago. We're actually featured in the keynote, right? So the US Navy was talking about Nutanix, and they use HYCU to protect their systems. So yeah, you can kind of say if the US Navy are happy with the security of HYCU and happy with their cyber resilience being based on HYCU, pretty much anyone else in the world can say that HYCU is going to be secure enough for them as well. So we move on to a security first approach. So we've spoken a bit about the appliance itself. So I mean, Marko, do you want to take this one quickly?
Which one?
The stripped back Linux variation. So you can kind of maybe explain a bit more about that, or do you want me to do it?
Yeah, sure. But basically, essentially what HYCU is, right? We're running on a Linux variation, and it's not your Linux which you come and download from the internet and kind of install your Linux machine, right? It's really secured, stripped out of all the modules which we don't use. So we make sure that the attack service again is as minimal as possible. So only what we use is delivered. Anything else we don't actually do. The root access, everything is completely removed as well. So and also from the patching perspective, right? We deliver the patches, we deliver the updates, and it's very interesting. Our patching mechanism on this Linux box is extremely fast and secure. The point there is that unless you have such a simple mechanism of upgrade and update, what happens is most of the customers, as you know, if you need to spend a weekend to do an upgrade, you're going to postpone it until you find a weekend which fits. And then for all of that time in between, you're actually susceptible to these OS security vulnerabilities, right? And with Haiku, really, our customers are very, very fast to do an update because it doesn't cost them. It costs them 5 minutes of their time to click update, right? And wait for 5 minutes for a machine to reboot, which is something also which even is going to get even better with our next release. But we'll talk more after our next release in June. So even that will not be needed. But the point is, with the secure and simple update, you can get the OS security updates and patches of vulnerabilities very fast, which is an important thing because this usually is the biggest threat, or how the ransomware kicks in is through the OS, right? It got, if we talk about Windows and so on, it makes it even that worse. Obviously, in this case, it's Linux. So we want to make sure that you don't have to think about it. You don't have to think about the OS. You get a black box. You click update. You update this black box. It has an OS, but it's a secure OS, and all the vulnerabilities are constantly updated, and that's the most important thing. So.
Absolutely, yeah, perfect. Let's go on to the next one. So the lightweight and efficient. So we kind of spoke about the kind of the legacy way of doing things, or how what is out there in the wild right now. And I want to talk about how Haiku do it. So we have an incredibly small footprint. So even at scale, so even if we're talking hundreds of virtual machines, we still only need typically normally one of these Haiku instances, right, or Haiku controllers, one virtual appliance on top of your infrastructure. We have zero agents, completely agentless throughout our solution. That's kind of a design principle from day one. It had to be agentless, right? There was no agents for anything, and that even includes physical machines. So when we're going out and protecting physical machines, we still don't have any agents installed on physical machines, which I think is an amazing thing that we can do. We still don't lose any capabilities. We still have application consistency and all those things you would expect from a backup tool, but we don't have the threat of installing and maintaining agents across all of those machines as well. That essentially gives us an incredibly small attack surface. We have a real bunkered down, as Marko mentioned, that Fort Knox of data protection there, and it's incredibly hard to break through. So we have an incredibly small attack surface. It's hard to break through. When we talk about attacks, we're talking about ROI for a lot of these for these cyber criminals, right? If it takes them 7 months to get through something, it's not worth their time, right? They're going to go after easier targets and find easier targets out there. That's not to say that ours is impenetrable. I wouldn't ever say any system is ever impenetrable. There's always a way. But if you're an attacker, are you going to try and spend this time on this, or are you going to spend your time where you want to get paid and get paid quickly, right? So that's what it is. And if we do need to scale out, we scale out with the exact same hardened image everywhere we go. So if you're running 20,000 VMs or whatever it might be, you use the exact same hardened image across all of these places, right? So you know that your security standard doesn't slip at scale as well. And then we look at access control. So we've already mentioned the dissig, and one of the recommendations there is, we can just remove SSH access, right? So disable the SSH access. So there's no even access into the appliance other than a console, right? There's no access into that. Root is disabled by default. We have secure isolation or multi-tenancy, whichever one you want to call it. So depending on, I don't like calling multi-tenancy because multi-tenancy normally, well, for me, kind of means, service providers. We obviously do have service providers, but even just in organizations where you've got different, working groups or different business units, they can have different tenancies inside of HYCU. So, and a machine can be assigned to group A or group B or group C. So when someone logs in, they only see group A, group B, or group C. And this isolation continues all the way down inside of the HYCU database as well. So even if you manage to get access into the database, you still can't read other people's data from there that you don't have access to. We try and make sure people enable MFA by default. We have IAM integration across the board for the most popular IAMs in the world, and we'd have a granular RBAC as well as what you'd expect from these places as well. And then we look at the lockdown and control. So we have the ability to remove UI and API access. So from those destructive tasks, so from manually expiring backups. So if you wanted to expire something out and manage that, we actually can remove access from the UI and API and be able to do that. So again, another mechanism around the way the bad actors can tamper with with things is manually expiring backups. We have a way to remove that completely. We can then pause expiration of good or clean backups. So maybe, for instance, maybe there's something going on. You're not quite sure if it's a cyber attack or something fishy or something strange in the environment. Yesterday's was a clean, good backup. and hopefully you're using the R Shield scanner, which we'll cover in next week's topic. But you know that's a clean one. So what you can do is, but maybe that's expiring. Maybe you only keep them for a week or a month or something. Then actually you want to make sure you're keeping that for longer. We can actually just pause expiration of those backups to make sure they don't expire. They're not removed from the system because you want a good clean copy. And of course, we have complete end-to-end encryption across, including every traffic that we generate and transmit, but also even a storage at rest storage as well. So any storage at rest encryption is supported as well.
I
So
think
we've got one.
maybe if
Oh,
Chris,
go on.
maybe
Yeah,
just go
no,
back.
go ahead.
No, I think for our, I still don't know if I trust the statistics on how many ransomware versus deletion, to be honest. uh, will still see a lot of fat fingers and somebody deleting or expiring something by mistake and similar things, which is, we're all people, which is logical and normal. So something again in this STIG as well, for example, but we always say, why don't you just remove this ability? Why would you allow even yourself to expire anything? It's not something you do on a daily basis. You can if you need to, and you can enable it back, but in general, you just keep it expired. So this is all about control and making sure that you don't also shoot yourself in the leg as well. And I think there's a question also on this zero agents and what kind of alternative tech we have. Basically, when we talk zero agents, what this means, agents are problematic when you actually have them constantly sitting there on the machine. You need to make sure they are upgraded yourself. You need to make sure that you push them out to all of the VMs every time and so on, right? It brings some flexibility, obviously, but it brings also the attack surface much further away. Whereas with HYCU, this is, when we say agents, no agents, it means that we actually don't require you to manage any of this, right? So we have a patent technology which allows us to remotely start something in the machine. And then at the end of the process, which we need to do, we will remove this, right? Obviously, we're a snapshot-based hypervisor solution, so we're never going to try to copy the data out of the VM itself. We use the data we get data from the Nutanix controller machines and from the Nutanix system itself. But if, let's say, we need to achieve consistent backups and similar things, for that, we actually need to execute something on the machine. But we will do this remotely, not through managing or agents or making you install and run these agents, right? So this is the interesting part of this.
Yeah, absolutely perfect. Well said. Thank you. So yeah, one more slide, and we've got some demo stuff, which is the cool stuff that Marco's going to show off. So I wanted to kind of go through the coverage again. And it's kind of actually boils onto the point that we just spoke about. So the native API integrations. This is where we differentiate ourselves massively, and we've always had 100% native API integration with Nutanix, and we always will do. So that we interact with the underlying platform. So we never interact directly with the guest OS, right? So even if we're doing an application consistent, we use Nutanix's guest tools, right? So we interact with Nutanix guest tools, and that interacts into the OS and does what it needs to do on that Nutanix platform. But if we're doing from the data, as Marco mentioned, we get it from the underlying storage platform in Nutanix, which is incredibly smart and clever. And that's the way we essentially capture the data. And then when I say here we have no data left behind, what I mean here is the coverage that you have across your Nutanix estate, and this is bespoke coverage for each individual workload. Most organizations, and I was the same, I didn't come from a Nutanix background when I joined HYCU. I was a VMware person for a long time. So I never really interacted much with Nutanix, but I knew Nutanix was AHV. That's kind of what I knew. But actually, I've started learning about it for, I think maybe 8 months I've been in now, something like that. That's gone quick. Now it's AHV is their core hypervisor, a platform, their core virtual machines, but they have NDB, which is their database management platform. They have Nutanix files, Nutanix objects, Nutanix cloud clusters in public cloud. They have NKP across their platform. They have unified storage. They have all of this stuff that is so much more than just virtualization and just virtual machines, that when customers start adopting Nutanix, they go, yeah, my backup vendor can do AHV. And then they go, well, what about NDB? It'd be really cool to utilize that. What about NC2? What about files? What about objects? And then the storage starts to unravel, whereas we have the wider support for all of these things. And as you can see on the screen here, so we were the first for NDB, but we have deep NDB integration. If we have time, maybe Marco, we can kind of show off a little bit of NDB stuff later on. we actually co-developed the change files tracking API with with Nutanix themselves. So our engineers and their engineers made it possible for us to to query an API and get a list of all the files that are changed from their file servers, right? So that's the level of integration that HYCU has that we can actually co-develop alongside Nutanix. We can also integrate with Nutanix replication. So if we're doing remote office, branch office, or replication for DR purposes, we can actually back up just the replica copies. So you're not having to move data twice or making it be more efficient. So these are the types of, I'm going to say niche, but the types of deep level integration that you don't typically get with other vendors. When you start talking about Nutanix and you start looking at these other places, this is where we really start to stand out way and above. I mean, I think we're still the best at AHV by a mile as well. But when you start looking at all these other places, this is when you start to really, really get it. And then flexibility and freedom. So we are, what did I was with our CEO yesterday at an event, so I can't remember the exact. We're a backup company, we're a software company, right? We don't sell storage. That's if you spoke to our CEO or anyone in the company, that should be a tagline. HYCU does not sell storage. We don't want to sell storage. We don't want to be in a game of transacting that. So we want to give customers complete flexibility and complete freedom at where they store their data. Obviously, you get to choose it wherever you want. So object stores on AWS, Google, Azure, on-premise object stores like Nutanix objects. We have deep integration with Dell Data Domain via their DDPoos protocol. We support NAS targets. We support tape. Marko, what else do we support? We support like Stonefly and Scality and all these other places that you can store data, right? And the idea is that people can bring pretty much whatever they want to HYCU and store whatever they want, right? That's the whole idea around this.
Freedom of choice.
Exactly that. And with that, we always have immutability as well. So as long as the storage target supports immutability and it's turned on, every backup you do with HYCU will be immutable. So there's no need in the HYCU policy or in the settings or no admin needs to go in and go, oh yeah, this backup is immutable, but this one isn't. For what reason would you not want to store immutable backups if you have the capability to do so, right? In this day and age, it makes sense to store them in a mutable format if you can. So as long as the storage target supports that immutable flag or however they turn it on, we support that by default as well. And then we've mentioned the data cloaking and isolation already. I think we've kind of covered that in enough detail. I won't cover that more. We'll make sure we get to the demo. And then anyone who wants vaulting. So I saw a question in the chat from Carl, I think it was. So yes, we'll cover it in more detail, but essentially the air gap concept is vaulting for us, right? So we support Dell Cyber Vault already. But we can also support kind of, I'm going to call it dark storage. Marko laughed at this earlier when I told him I'm going to call it dark storage, but essentially offline storage, right? So you write to the data, you write the data to storage. If that you can disconnect that from HYCU if you want to, and at a later date you can reattach that back into HYCU, rescan, reindex, and we can restore the data from that. So for instance, this will be fixed with managed replication, which is coming soon in my second point there. But for instance, we have customers at the moment who are utilizing data domain replication, right? So they have HYCU writing directly to a data domain, and then in the background, data domain is replicating to a second one, locked away in a cupboard, isolated away, data diodes, and all that kind of stuff in their vault. And essentially what happens is if they need to get to the vault, they can either provision a brand new HYCU instance and reattach it to that, or reattach it to the existing HYCU instance if it's still available, and then read that data from there as well. So that's how we kind of cover that air gap concept, and go from there. So hopefully that answers your question, Carl. If you have any more questions, just ping us in the questions again. So that is my last point that I'm going to make here, and then we're going to go into demo. So I'm just going to see if there's any questions. So
I've answered a couple of questions, yeah, regarding we have a learning center also where you can experience HYCU, get hands-on experience, labs, you can get the click-through and everything else. So definitely there in our learning center.
Amazing. So yeah, I'll pause just for a brief moment. If anyone's got any questions, please type them in the QA now. If not, we'll move into Marko and a live demo. Cool. Mark, I'll stop sharing, and you want to take over?
Definitely. Replace. All right. Chris, you confirm you see it, so we can.
Yep, I see it. Perfect.
Excellent. So I think we're tight on time, but I think it's well worth it to actually see the product a bit in action as well. not only the slideware.
Absolutely.
So again,
We've got it booked out
HYCU's.
for an hour, so if people want to drop off first,
It
we
is.
can. But so
Then we'll take it for an hour and a half. But so really, HYCU's virtual appliance. So comes as a black box you deployed. I've got asked a lot of times, can you really deploy it in 3 minutes? Yeah, it's a virtual appliance. You get an image, you configure the network, and that's it, right? You don't have to think about anything else. Obviously, you log in with identity providers. We really don't want to keep your passwords. There is a kind of fail-safe last resort account, which is a super user, which you still have inside to use. But in essence, you really want to have a multi-factor authentication. Your identity providers fully configured, which is something you have with HYCU, right? So you support pretty much any identity provider you can think of, with AD and Google, Microsoft Okta, OpenID concepts. So you can pretty much add any identity provider into HYCU in order to log in. You continue with the STIG. You go in, you STIG it. You make sure that you have all the rules kind of applied from that perspective, where you can nobody can log in. You can disable SSH, so you can't actually log into the HYCU VM itself via SSH. You can only access UI, and if you have access to the Nutanix console, then you can access HYCU itself. But if somebody has access to your console, you're already in much deeper problems if they have access to your Nutanix, right? So this is something you can do. And first thing in HYCU is really to add the sources into it. And here, what you can see is us adding a couple of Nutanix clusters, for example, VMware file servers, even cloud and physical servers. You have your IC-loans, Nutanix files, NetApp. So all of these integrate with change file tracking as well. But what's really interesting about Nutanix, when talking about Nutanix, is apart from Nutanix files, when you're adding Nutanix into HYCU, you'll see that we'll discover Prism Central as well as part of this. And recently also we'll discover the NDB, so Nutanix database services. So we'll discover that, hey, these are already running on your environment, and we'll ask you, hey, do you wanna configure this as well? And what you gain by doing this is really automation from Prism Central, because you can assign HYCU policies automatically based on the processes. So from security aspect, if somebody adds another VM and they don't tell you about it, using HYCU policies, you can actually make sure that they are automatically protected, because you can enable something called auto assignment, and then based on these, if they set a specific tag in HYCU, you make sure that this is protected, right? And this goes to the Prism Central categories. And even if something is not there, for example, somebody forgot to put this process, you have a set default policy, which is catch it all policy. So you make sure that somebody's very important VM, which they forgot to mention, that you need to back up, is always at least backed up for the first time. Another thing when we talk about security aspect is the multi-tenancy, if you want, right? And segregation of the data itself in HYCU. So when logging into HYCU, you have, first of all, it's role-based, right? So when you add somebody as a user into HYCU, you will be adding it through they have different roles, right? So they can be just a backup restore operator, or maybe a full-blown admin, which is important so that you really segregate who has access to what, even on the whole infrastructure layer. But also on top of that, you have the ability to segregate machines. So if you're an MSP and you want to have different set of protection for different customers, you can use this HYCU's multi-tenancy to create new groups of users. And again, here, we can link this even to the Prism Central categories again, because if this is a environment customer X or DevOps environment, once you add this group into HYCU, all of the Prism Central based on the Prism Central, we actually assign VMs of a user into this group. And when I say group, what I mean is, let's say you have a DevOps team which manages all of your databases, or a company X, which is your customer. You want to expose access to them to do their own work, maybe do a restore, do a backup before doing a big patch of some server, so they don't have to call the IT every time. And this is the benefit of this, where each of these tenants inside HYCU gets his own separate database schema, completely segregated inside our database. So they really kind of think of it as many HYCUs in a single HYCU. And with, you can, if they log into HYCU, like for instance, let's switch now into DevOps role, impersonate ourselves, they will be able to see only the VMs which were assigned to them. And then based on the role which we gave them, they can maybe perform just a restore or maybe do an application aware backup and similar things. So this is really what it's all about. And talking about the sources, since this is a Nutanix webinar, we can actually show you how this looks like also from the NDB, which was just newly added a couple of months back, where we have the NDB databases fully discovered and marked as such by HYCU. And then HYCU is making sure that we protect this NDB in an appropriate way so that we remove the disks which don't need to be backed up, which are managed by Nutanix databases. We make sure that we do restore in appropriate way so that when we do a restore of a VM, we correct all of the NDB so that it survives this restores as well. So let's say we've added our sources. We have our NDBs, we have our files, we have our volume groups, we have our applications discovered. So volume groups are again something which is very unique with HYCU, where we are the only ones who do snapshot-based backups of these volume groups as well. And the next thing, once you added all of these sources, you configured your application, you discovered your applications, which is more important. You have your NDB or regular databases. The next thing is to actually go and configure a target. And what's here is, again, freedom of choice, as we always say, but also the most important thing when it comes to targets is immutability, right? So something as Chris mentioned, you can enable it on target, practically any target which has immutability supported, we support it as well. You get a nice shield here. And what's really interesting, the way how we write into this immutable targets is there's a benefit of how we do it. You don't have to lock it for a full year, right? Let's say you need to have a immutability for a year, but you're not certain if this is really a full-blown decision by the management, or maybe the customer which you're locking this data for might leave in 2 months and then leave you with this data. So it's a problem because you're going to be stuck with their data. Nobody can delete this immutable data. So with HYCU, what you can do is you can lock it just for a month, for example, and then HYCU has the built-in ability to come in and then on the object level. So each object that we need, which was written into the S3 data domain, some storage, right? We have the ability to prolong it for longer period of time. Right? So in a month, we'll come in and say, okay, this one's supposed to expire, but it shouldn't. We'll increase or prolong their immutability for next 3 months. And then again, the next 3 months and so on. So giving you kind of a get out of jail free card. If a customer leaves, you're not stuck with their data for a year. After a couple of months, you might be able to delete it, right? So again, some special from the immutability. And maybe to show you also the expiration problem, right? I wanted to expire just this particular restore point. By mistake, I actually expired a full, which meant I expired the whole thing. So as you can see here, I'm not allowed to do this from the API or from UI because I've set it on the appliance itself. On the back end, I made sure that I can't shoot myself in the leg. So a very interesting feature there as well. And then you have functionality, which, for example, which also Chris was mentioning, where you might want to prolong a specific restore point, which is very important because you did a patch, it's a clean server at that point, or something is very special at this particular restore point. So you want to keep it for longer, right? So you have also in HYCU, which maybe even the old HYCU is not aware of, the full-blown retention management, which we built into the system, where you can expire multiple stuff in essence, but you can also set the retention period or prolong it if you want, so that if a particular restore point is very important, you can find it here and you can say, look, I want to increase this, and say, I'm just gonna increase the period for 6 weeks or keep it a bit longer, right? So this is what you can do with HYCU retentions as well.
And yeah, and
Uh,
just to be clear, obviously, it's kind of obvious. Marco hasn't said it explicitly. You can't shorten the retention, right? So it can't be used by a bad actor to come in and settle your backups to shorten that. I don't make it clear because sometimes we do get that question. Or
yeah,
if you can change the retention period, yeah, you can only prolong, so we can only make it longer.
yeah,
Just wanted to make that super clear because I
yeah,
was a bit
for sure.
confused when I first heard it. I was like, what? You can change the retention? That doesn't make sense. But yeah, you can only prolong, only go one way.
Now, so yeah, that's I think what we wanted to show you for this particular first webinar in a short little demo, and then the next one might be even more interesting because we're gonna talk about some of the new functionality with scanning of VMs and making sure that we track the change rates, we get anomalies and so on. So these kind of things we can show in the next webinar
Yeah, really,
as well.
really looking forward to that one. Marco, we have got a few more minutes, and
Hmm.
one of our attendees has asked if you could elaborate on just on the NDB restore. Um,
Hmm.
I know that we've got a restore session coming up in a couple of weeks, but this is quite specific to NDB. So just in case we don't get time in that session, because we've got a
Yep,
lot to cover in
sure,
restore, should we
makes
do it
sense.
now? Yes, we've got a few more minutes.
Makes sense. Makes sense. So the NDB is it's a sensitive animal. It's very, uh, so you can't just restore a VM, let's say in place. If you delete a VM, restore it with the same IDs, your NDB is going to be down and out, right? Because it can't survive all of these changes from the IDs on the disk level and similar things. So what HYCU makes sure that during the restore of an NDB server, right, we will make sure that during the restore we actually replace the disks, not the whole VM. We'll make sure that we restore then the whole disks which are needed, either the OS disk, the database disk, whatever is needed, whatever you select in HYCU, which is an additional value when it comes to NDB recovery. And then we'll also run the tail log backup, as you can see here, an option which is by default on, which will actually do a log backup of before HYCU performs a restore. This means that the NDB time machine is going to have a minimal, practically zero hole in between, which means after HYCU does a restore, you can use NDB to get it back into any point in time as well. So really shortening this time span. And at the end, what restore also does for NDB is NDB protects your database and does a point in time machine and so on. How does it do it? Through protection domains, right? They configure protection domains on the backend, and they use these protection domains to back up the disks, to do snapshots, not backup, but snapshots of disks for point in time recovery and similar. Somebody needs to correct this after restore as well, because otherwise this is going to be unusable because you're going to have all disks which are no longer there. So we really make sure that this is truly integrated with NDB so that after a restore, you can just continue using it and your point in time machine is kept fully intact as much as possible, right? It's not an easy task. It took us a lot of a lot of cycles in engineering together with Nutanix to come with the full blown solution, but it works great.
Yeah, the backup of NDB is definitely easier than the restore of NDB,
Yeah, yeah,
right?
correct,
So
correct.
anyone who says, "Oh, we can back up that," yeah, you can back it up, but will it
Yeah,
break
yeah,
everything when you restore it? That's the key question. We
exactly,
got
exactly.
another question from Mike. Are volume groups from the view of the Nutanix cluster or the VMs running on the Nutanix cluster?
Um, so it's both, I would say. So basically, how volume groups, what does this volume groups means in HYCU, right? So let's say you have, or where are volume groups used in the first place with Nutanix? If you have failover clusters or large file servers and similar, then Nutanix recommends you keep the data of the VMs on the volume groups, not on the disks attached. So you get better performance and scalability from Nutanix itself. Now, when HYCU does a backup of a VM, let's say this engineering VM 13, right? When I'm backing it up, what HYCU is going to do is we will recognize that it has a volume groups attached to it automatically. And as part of this backup, HYCU is simply going to back up all the disks, but also it's going to snapshot all the volume groups and do the change block tracking on the volume groups as well. They're very unique. Nobody else does actually this because if you have volume groups, all the other solutions will have to use agents to copy the data out of a VM, right? So these volume groups are automatically recognized. If they're attached from Nutanix, we're going to recognize them. If they're attached through iSCSI on the VM level, again, if you assign credentials to a VM, we will again recognize them automatically. So full-blown automation is there to make sure that when you back up a VM, a SQL server, a file server, whatever, it's going to get automatically protected, all right? And this volume group is here also in addition, if you're using volume groups for something else, not attaching them to VM, maybe for containers and similar things, you can always just go in here and assign a policy explicitly to a volume group and back it up as
Perfect. Yeah, one more question's popped in. I think I know the answer to this one, but I'll ask it to you anyway, just from the presenter so when we prolong the lock from Haiku, um, no one will be able to delete it when accessing the container from the storage. So this first about AWS, but from the storage directly. So if it's in the, if we go to AWS and browse the bucket, we won't be able to delete it, right?
Correct. Yeah, it's full immutability. Not even support can delete it. Nobody can delete this. Yeah.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, we essentially use the platform that's there, right? So we use the object block in AWS, for instance. So
Yep.
we're using their native technology, not our own software lock. We're using exactly what
Yeah.
AWS
It's not.
want us
It's
to use.
exactly. It's just on the object level. It's not on the full blown bucket. So we have more control, and this way we can give you this neat feature of make sure that you. I mean, if you know you have to lock it for a year, lock it. Why bother with it, right? But if you want to have some peace of mind or a chance to get out, then this is a nice feature as well.
Yeah, I've actually I come across this in the wild. Um we had some VMs and then and a file share was set on some VMs and it got used by a project that we didn't really understand what the project did. Then we realized it was an engineering like a civil engineering project in the UK and that data had to be retained for 10 years. So the immutability period was set for 6 months, which was the standard for this. But actually, then we had to set this particular VM to now have 10 years of immutability because we knew we needed to keep it. But at the time, the requirements weren't known, right? So that's the great thing about this. You don't have to then go and do another backup and then keep that one for 10 years. It's you can extend the same
You can
backup. So
extend it as well.
perfect. Well, we're about 5 minutes from the end. So thanks everyone for your time and your
Questions?
attention during this time and your questions. Yeah, the questions really do make it much easier for me and Marco to really dive down into what you guys want to speak about. So myself and Marco will be back next week for the next session where we'll be diving into the always observing piece. So things we'll be covering as a little teaser. We'll be covering malware scanning, anomaly detection, um, monitoring alerting, which I know sounds really boring, but it is actually really cool with Haiku as well. And those types of bits, and just kind of how we can observe the platform and understand what's going on, so you guys have better visibility to make sure you have clean and validated backups. So hopefully we'll see everyone on the next time. If you have colleagues that haven't been able to join this one, please send it out to them as well.
I think we have a recording as well, Chris, so we can send out to
we
those
do.
that
We do as well. So yeah, we'll send that out and we'll better forward that on. But yeah, please send the invites across to any one of your colleagues who you think may find interesting. But if not, we'll see you all on the next one. And thank you very much, Marco. I really appreciate it.
Thank you, Chris. Thanks, everybody.